The cold metal floor of Station Karavesh felt like ice against Velcross's scales. He pressed himself deeper into the shadows of the maintenance corridor, trying to disappear into the darkness. The smell of food from the market district drifted through the ventilation systems, making his empty stomach twist with hunger. 3 months. It had been 3 months since the Draconic Imperium had cast him out. 3 months since they had burned the mark of shame into his crimson scales, turning them black and ugly. 3 months since he had eaten a proper meal. Velcross closed his eyes and tried to remember what it felt like to be full, to be respected, to matter. But those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now. Someone who no longer existed. The sound of footsteps made him open his eyes. A group of Thurian merchants appeared at the end of the corridor. Their reptilian faces twisted into cruel grins when they spotted him. "Look, the coward dragon is still here," the largest one said, his voice dripping with mockery. The others laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the metal walls. Velcross said nothing. He had learned that silence was safer. Words only made things worse. One of the Thurians kicked a piece of spoiled fruit across the floor. It rolled to a stop near Velcross's claws, already rotting and covered in mold. The merchants laughed harder, as if this was the funniest thing they had ever seen. "What's wrong, mighty dragon?" another Thurian sneered. "Too proud to eat garbage? That's all you're worth now." The largest merchant pulled out a sealed food packet, the kind that contained real, fresh food. He waved it in front of Velcross, letting the dragon smell the meat inside. Velcross's mouth watered involuntarily. His claw reached out slowly, carefully. The Thurian snatched the packet away just as Velcross's claw was about to touch it. His companions roared with laughter, slapping each other's backs as if this was the greatest entertainment in the galaxy. "Did you really think I would waste good food on you?" the merchant said, tucking the packet back into his bag. "Marked dragons deserve nothing but scraps." Velcross lowered his claw in his head. Shame burned through him, hotter than any fire he had once been able to breathe. He wanted to roar at them to show them that he was still a dragon, still worthy of respect. But he had no fire anymore. The Imperium had taken that too. And even if he could fight, he had sworn never to use violence again. That oath had cost him everything, but it was all he had left. "Please," Velcross whispered, hating himself for the word even as it left his mouth. "I have not eaten in 4 days." The Thurians laughed even harder. One of them spat at Velcross's feet. "Begging now? How far the mighty have fallen. Leave him alone." The voice was quiet, but it cut through the laughter like a blade. The Thurians turned to see who had spoken. A human stood a few meters away. He was not particularly tall or muscular. His brown hair was messy, and his jacket was old and patched in several places. He looked like a pilot, probably from one of the smaller freighters that docked at the station. Nothing about him suggested he was important or dangerous. But he stood there, meeting the Thurian's eyes without flinching. "This is not your business, human," the lead Thurian growled, taking a step toward him. "Walk away." "I am walking away," the human said calmly. "And he's coming with me." The Thurian's eyes narrowed. "You want the marked dragon? What? Planning to use him as cheap labor? Smart move, human. He's worthless otherwise." The human did not respond to the insult. He just stood there waiting. His face showed no fear, no anger, just a quiet determination that seemed unshakable. The Thurians exchanged glances. Finally, the leader snorted. "Whatever. Enjoy your coward dragon, human. Just don't expect anyone to respect you for keeping such company." They walked away, their laughter fading down the corridor. Velcross waited for the human to leave too. Everyone left eventually. That was the nature of exile. But the human did not leave. Instead, he walked over and sat down on the floor beside Velcross. Not standing over him. Not keeping a safe distance. He just sat down, as if sitting next to an exiled dragon in a dirty maintenance corridor was perfectly normal. Velcross stared at him in confusion. Up close, he could see that the human was younger than he had first appeared, maybe 30 cycles in human years. His hands were calloused from work, and there was a tiredness in his eyes that spoke of long hours and hard living. The human reached into his bag and pulled out a cloth-wrapped package. When he unwrapped it, the smell hit Velcross like a physical force. Bread. Real bread, still slightly warm, with cheese and some kind of dried meat. Velcross's stomach growled so loudly that the human smiled. "My name is Daniel," the human said. He broke the bread in half with his hands. The motion was casual, easy, as if he did this every day. "You look hungry." He held out half of the bread to Velcross. Velcross could not move, could not speak. He stared at the offered food, his mind struggling to understand what was happening. In all his months of exile, no one had offered him anything except mockery and pain. No one had shown him kindness. And now this stranger, this human who owed him nothing and had nothing to gain, was offering to share his meal. "I do not understand," Velcross finally managed to say, his voice rough from disuse. "Why would you do this? I am marked. Associating with me will bring you shame." Daniel shrugged, still holding out the bread. "You were hungry. I had food. Seems simple to me. Simple." The word echoed in Velcross's mind. Nothing in his life was simple anymore. Everything was complicated, painful, wrapped in layers of cultural rules and traditions that had ultimately destroyed him. But this human made it sound so easy. So obvious. As if sharing food with a starving being was just what people did. Velcross's pride screamed at him to refuse. He was a dragon. Dragons did not accept charity. Dragons did not show weakness. But his pride had already cost him his home, his family, his very identity. What more could it take? With trembling claws, Velcross reached out and accepted the bread. It was the best thing he had ever tasted. Not because it was particularly special, though the bread was well made and still fresh. It tasted good because it was given freely, offered without conditions or mockery. Each bite felt like a small piece of his dignity returning. Daniel ate his own half in comfortable silence. He did not stare at Velcross. He did not ask questions about the mark of shame. He did not demand explanations or gratitude. He just sat there sharing a meal with someone who needed it. When they finished eating, Velcross tried to find words adequate to express what this meant to him. But his throat felt tight, and emotions he had buried for months threatened to overwhelm him. "Thank you," he finally whispered. It felt inadequate, too small for what had just happened. But it was all he could offer. Daniel nodded, brushing crumbs from his hands. "You are welcome." He stood up and shouldered his bag. For a moment, Velcross thought he would leave now, and this strange, wonderful encounter would be over. But Daniel paused and looked down at him. "I dock here pretty regularly. I will probably see you around." It was not a promise. Not exactly. But it was something. A suggestion that this might not be the last time. That maybe, just maybe, Velcross was not completely alone in the universe. Daniel walked away, his footsteps echoing in the corridor. Velcross watched him go, still tasting bread on his tongue, still feeling the warmth of shared kindness. For the first time in 3 months, Velcross felt something other than despair. It was fragile and small, barely more than a spark. But it was there, burning in his chest where his fire used to be. Hope. Daniel came back the next day just as he had suggested. Velcross was still in the same corridor, still hiding in the shadows, when he heard familiar footsteps approaching. His heart lifted in a way he had not expected. "Hey," Daniel said, sitting down in what was apparently becoming his usual spot beside the dragon. He pulled out another package of food. This time it was some kind of grain with vegetables and strips of chicken. "Hungry?" Velcross accepted gratefully. As they ate, Daniel talked about his ship, the Wandering Star. It was a small cargo freighter, the kind that ran independent jobs across the sector. Nothing fancy, nothing special. Just honest work moving goods from one station to another. "The ship is old," Daniel said with a slight smile. "The engines need repairs I cannot quite afford yet. But she flies and she is mine." For 3 more days Daniel returned. Each time with food. Each time with conversation. Velcross learned about Earth, about human history, about how Daniel had saved for 10 years to buy his own ship. And Daniel learned about Velcross, about the duel he had refused to fight, about the philosophy of nonviolence that had made him an outcast among his own people. On the 5th day Daniel did not just bring food. He brought a proposal. "I need crew," Daniel said, his tone casual but his eyes serious. "Someone strong enough to handle heavy cargo. Someone smart enough to navigate the difficult situations that come up in this business. Someone I can trust." He paused. "Interested?" Velcross stared at him in disbelief. "You want to hire me?" "That is exactly what I am saying. Daniel, I am marked." Velcross gestured to the black brand on his scales. "Everyone who sees this knows what I am. An exile. A coward in the eyes of my people. If you hire me you will lose business. Other species will refuse to work with you. Station masters will deny you docking rights. You will be punished for showing me kindness." Daniel listened to all of this without interrupting. When Velcross finished he simply nodded. "Probably. But I still need crew and you still need work. I can offer fair pay, fair treatment, and a place to sleep that is not a cold corridor. What do you say?" Velcross felt something crack inside his chest. For months he had believed he was worthless. Everyone had treated him that way. The universe had confirmed it again and again. But this human who barely knew him was offering him dignity, purpose, a chance. Yes, Velcross said, his voice barely above a whisper. I say yes. 2 days later they left Station HFY together. Velcross walked beside Daniel through the docking area, and for the first time in months he held his head up. People stared. Some pointed. A few made insulting gestures. But Daniel walked steadily forward and Velcross followed. The wandering star was exactly as Daniel had described. Small, old, with patches welded over patches on the hull. But when Velcross stepped inside, he felt something he had not felt since his exile began. Safety. Your quarters are here, Daniel said, showing him to a small cabin. It had a bed designed for larger species, a storage locker, and a small desk. Nothing fancy. But it was clean, private, and warm. Make yourself comfortable. We leave in 3 hours. Their first job was a simple cargo run to a mining colony in the Beta sector. Medical supplies and replacement parts for drilling equipment. Easy work, good pay. Or it should have been. When they arrived at the mining colony and requested docking clearance, the response was immediate and harsh. Request denied. The station master's voice crackled over the comm. No marked dragons allowed on this station. Daniel's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. He is a member of my crew. Legal under Galactic Employment Law, Section 7, Article 12. You cannot deny docking based on cultural markings. There was a long pause. I do not care about your laws, human. Turn your ship around. Daniel leaned back in his pilot's seat, thinking. Then he pressed the comm button again. Fine. I will report this docking refusal to the Galactic Trade Commission. I am sure they will be very interested to hear about discrimination violations. The fines for that are quite heavy. Usually enough to shut down a station for several months while investigations proceed. Another pause, longer this time. Velcross could almost hear the station master calculating costs in his head. Docking Bay 4, the station master finally muttered. But keep that dragon out of sight. Thank you for your cooperation, Daniel said pleasantly, as if they had just had a friendly conversation. Inside the ship, Velcross looked at Daniel with amazement. You knew the law. You studied it. Of course I did, Daniel said, guiding the ship toward the docking bay. I figured it might come in handy. The cargo delivery went smoothly, but when it came time to collect payment, the client took one look at Velcross and frowned. I am cutting the payment by 20%, the client said. I did not agree to work with marked dragons. That changes the terms. Daniel started to argue, but the client was firm. In the end they took the reduced payment and left. It was still enough to cover fuel and supplies, but barely. Back on the ship, Daniel transferred half the credits to Velcross's account without hesitation. Daniel, no, Velcross protested. The payment was cut because of me. You should not have to suffer for my presence. You loaded cargo, you secured it properly, you did the work, Daniel said firmly. You earned your share. That is how this works. Velcross felt his throat tighten with emotion. In draconic culture, value was determined by strength and status. The weak served the strong and received whatever scraps were offered. But Daniel operated on a completely different principle. Everyone who worked received fair payment. Status meant nothing. Only effort mattered. Over the following weeks, the pattern repeated. Some stations refused them docking. Some clients cut their pay. A few jobs were cancelled entirely when potential customers learned about Velcross. But Daniel never complained. He never blamed Velcross. He simply adapted, found other work, and always split the profits fairly. And every evening they shared meals together in the small galley. Daniel introduced Velcross to human food. Pasta with red sauce. Stir-fried rice with vegetables. Something called pizza that was covered in melted cheese and made Velcross's eyes water with joy. Dishes from a dozen Earth cultures, each one strange and wonderful. This is incredible, Velcross said one evening, savoring a spicy noodle dish Daniel had prepared. I never knew food could taste like this. Daniel grinned. Wait until I make tacos. That will really blow your mind. As they ate they talked. About philosophy, about cultures, about dreams and regrets. Daniel spoke of growing up on Earth, of watching the stars and knowing he had to reach them somehow. Velcross spoke of his home world, of the beauty of draconic art and poetry that existed alongside the violence and rigid hierarchy. Do you miss it? Daniel asked one night. Your home. Velcross considered the question carefully. I miss what it could have been. I miss the parts that were beautiful. But I do not miss the cruelty. I do not miss being forced to choose between my principles and my people. He looked at Daniel. Here on this ship I do not have to choose. I can be who I am. That is all anyone should have to be, Daniel said quietly. A month into their partnership, Velcross realized something profound. The mark of shame was still on his scales. Other species still treated him with contempt when they saw it. He was still in exile, still rejected by his own kind. But he no longer felt worthless. Every morning he woke in a warm bed. Every day he did meaningful work. Every evening he shared meals with someone who treated him as an equal. Daniel never asked him to be anything other than himself. Never demanded he prove his worth. Never made him feel small. One evening, as they sat in the galley eating Daniel's attempt at curry, which was slightly too spicy but still delicious, Velcross spoke the thought that had been growing in his mind. Daniel, why do you do this? Why hire people that everyone else rejects? Daniel was quiet for a moment, considering his words. I guess I believe that being different is not the same as being less. You were rejected because you chose peace over violence. That does not make you a coward. It makes you brave. Braver than those who only know how to fight. He met Velcross's eyes. Everyone deserves a chance to be valued for who they are, not what society says they should be. Velcross felt warmth spread through his chest. Not the fire he had lost, but something better. Something that felt like home. Thank you, he said softly, for seeing me when everyone else looked away. Daniel smiled and raised his water glass. To new beginnings. Velcross raised his own glass. To belonging. They drank together, two outcasts who had found family in the vastness of space. The job offer came through on a Tuesday morning. A medical supply run through the Karath expanse to a frontier colony experiencing an outbreak of vermian flu. The pay was triple their usual rate, enough to finally fix the Wandering Star's failing secondary thrusters and still have credits left over. The Karath expanse, Velcross said slowly, reading the contract details on the data pad. That is pirate territory. Daniel nodded from the pilot's seat, running pre-flight checks. It is. But the colony needs these supplies. People are dying. And honestly, we need the credits. I understand, Velcross said. He trusted Daniel's judgment. If Daniel thought they could make it, then they would try. They loaded the cargo carefully. Vaccines, antibiotics, medical equipment. All of it essential. All of it irreplaceable. The colony had sent desperate messages describing children struggling to breathe, elderly dying in the night. This cargo represented hope for thousands of people. The first 2 days of the journey went smoothly. They navigated through the outer edges of the expanse without incident. Daniel kept the ship running dark, minimal emissions trying to avoid detection. They were careful, quiet, invisible. On the third day, the ship's alarms screamed to life. 3 vessels approaching fast, Daniel said, his fingers flying over the controls. Signatures matched known pirate configurations. Velcross moved to the weapons station, though the Wandering Star only had basic defensive systems. Can we outrun them? Not with our current engine situation, Daniel said grimly. They are faster and they have us surrounded. The pirate ships closed in like predators circling wounded prey. They cut off every escape route with practiced precision. This was not their first ambush. A harsh voice crackled over the comm system. Freighter Wandering Star, power down your engines immediately. Prepare to be boarded. Surrender your cargo or be destroyed. You have 30 seconds to comply. Daniel and Velcross exchanged a long look. They both knew what losing this cargo meant. People would die. Children would die. We cannot give it up, Velcross said quietly. I know, Daniel replied. The seconds ticked down. At 0, the pirate ships fired warning shots across the Wandering Star's bow. Then, with a metallic clang that echoed through the hull, one of the ships docked forcefully with their airlock. Get ready, Daniel said, moving away from the controls. He grabbed a stun baton from the emergency locker. Velcross positioned himself near the cargo bay entrance, his large frame ready to defend their shipment. The airlock hissed open. Armed figures poured into the ship. There were at least 8 of them, carrying weapons that ranged from energy rifles to plasma blades. They moved with the confidence of people who had done this many times before and always won. Their leader entered last. He was a Cravashi, a species known for their brutality and love of combat. He stood nearly as tall as Velcross, covered in scars that he wore like medals. His name, Velcross would later learn, was Drex. His reputation was known throughout the sector. Cruel, efficient, and merciless. Drex's eyes swept over the ship's interior, cataloging everything of value. Then his gaze landed on Velcross and a slow, cruel smile spread across his scarred face. Well, Drex said, his voice like gravel scraping metal. What do we have here? A marked dragon. He turned to his crew. Look, boys. A coward dragon playing at being cargo crew. His pirates laughed, harsh sounds that filled the small space. Velcross felt the familiar shame crawl up his spine, but he held his position. He would not let them have the cargo without a fight, even if fighting meant breaking his oath. Drex walked closer, studying the black brand on Velcross's scales. I have heard about you, marked once. Cast out by your own kind for being too weak to fight. Too pathetic to uphold dragon honor. He spat at Velcross's feet. Where is your pride now, lizard? Where is your fire? Velcross said nothing. He had learned long ago that words did not help in situations like this. Silence was safer. Leave him alone, Daniel said, stepping forward with his stun baton. You want the cargo? Let's talk terms. Drex glanced at Daniel as if noticing an insect. Then, almost casually, he backhanded the human. The blow sent Daniel flying into the bulkhead with a sickening crunch. He crumpled to the floor, blood running from his split lip. I do not negotiate with humans, Drex said dismissively. Then he turned back to Velcross, his smile widening. But I do enjoy entertainment. He pointed one clawed finger at Velcross. You, dragon. I will give you a choice. Kneel before me. Beg for your life and for the life of your pathetic human captain. Beg properly with the respect I deserve, and maybe, just maybe, I will let you both live. I will take the cargo and leave you breathing. The pirates formed a circle, blocking all exits. Their weapons were trained on both Velcross and Daniel. There was no escape. No way to fight. Even if Velcross broke his oath of nonviolence, he could not defeat 8 armed pirates. Velcross looked at Daniel, who was struggling to stand, using the wall for support. Blood dripped from his chin. One of his eyes was already swelling shut. But he met Velcross's gaze with determination. Every instinct in Velcross's body screamed at him to fight, to rage, to die with honor rather than kneel. But he had given up that kind of honor long ago. He had chosen a different path. And kneeling to save a life was not the same as cowardice. Was it? His legs began to bend. He started to lower himself to the floor. No, Daniel said. His voice was quiet but absolutely firm. He pushed himself away from the wall, swaying slightly but standing upright. He is not kneeling to you. Drex laughed, a booming sound that shook the air. What are you going to do about it, little human? You can barely stand. This, Daniel said. He pressed a button on his wrist control. Everything happened at once. The ship's plasma coolant vents opened with explosive force. Superheated white gas erupted into the corridor, filling every space with blinding fog. The temperature spiked instantly. The pirates screamed, covering their eyes, disoriented and blind. Velcross bridge now. Daniel shouted through the chaos. Velcross did not hesitate. He grabbed Daniel with one massive claw and ran. Behind them, Drex roared orders to his crew, but they were stumbling, confused, unable to see through the dense gas. They reached the bridge in seconds. Daniel threw himself into the pilot's seat despite his injuries, his hands moving across the controls with desperate speed. Daniel, we are still docked to their ship, Velcross said urgently. We cannot jump to hyperspace while connected. It will tear us apart. I know the rules, Daniel said, his fingers never stopping. I am breaking them. Daniel, no. The stress on the hull will. Hold on to something, Daniel interrupted. He engaged the emergency separation protocol. Metal shrieked as the wandering star tore free from the pirate ship's docking clamp. Alarms blared. Red warning lights flashed across every screen. The ship shuddered violently. Drex and his pirates were still aboard, somewhere in the gas-filled corridors. But Daniel did not wait. He entered jump coordinates with one hand while the other activated the hyperspace drive. Jump drive engaging, the computer announced in a calm voice that contrasted sharply with the chaos around them. Warning, foreign objects detected in ship. Warning, hull integrity at 60%. Warning, this jump vector is not recommended. Override all warnings, Daniel commanded. Jump now. The universe twisted. Reality bent. The wandering star leaped into hyperspace with pirates still stumbling through its corridors, with hull breaches screaming, with every system pushed far beyond safe limits. The ship groaned like a living thing in pain. Metal screeched. Lights flickered. For a terrible moment, Velcross thought they would simply tear apart in the space between spaces. Then they emerged. Normal space snapped back into place around them. The jump had thrown them into a safe zone, far from the Karath expanse. But the ship was a disaster. Alarms continued blaring. Smoke drifted from damaged conduits. And somewhere behind them, the pirates were either dead from the jump or very, very angry. Daniel quickly located them. 2 pirates had been thrown into the cargo bay during the jump. 3 more were in the corridors, unconscious. Drex himself was in the engine room, slowly getting to his feet. But they were in a safe zone now. A coalition patrol ship was already hailing them, having detected the emergency jump signature. The pirates knew they were beaten. Within minutes, coalition security beamed aboard and took the pirates into custody. When they were finally alone, Velcross turned to Daniel. The human was still in the pilot's seat, bleeding, bruised, checking damage reports with shaking hands. "You risked your ship," Velcross said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your life. Everything. For my dignity." Daniel looked up at him, one eye swollen, completely shut now, blood dried on his face. "You are my friend, Velcross. Friends do not let friends kneel to bullies. But the ship, the damage could have killed us both." "Would have been worth it," Daniel said simply. He tried to smile but winced as it pulled at his split lip. Velcross felt something break inside him, but in a good way. Like ice melting after a long winter. He had thought he understood what Daniel's friendship meant. But now he truly knew. Daniel had not just refused to let him kneel. He had been willing to die rather than watch Velcross lose his dignity. "On my world, I was taught that strength is everything," Velcross said quietly. "That those who refuse violence are weak. That honor comes from defeating your enemies." He paused, looking at this small, injured human who had just done the impossible. "You showed more courage than 1,000 draconic warriors. You showed me what real strength looks like." Daniel managed a small smile. "That is just being human, Velcross." "No," Velcross said firmly. "That is being exceptional." The repairs to the Wandering Star took 3 weeks. Daniel and Velcross limped the damaged ship to Frontier Station Jericho, a rough outpost on the edge of civilized space where mechanics asked fewer questions and charged slightly lower rates. While the hull was being patched and the jump drive recalibrated, word began to spread. A human captain had fought pirates to protect a marked dragon's dignity. He had risked his ship, his life, everything rather than let his crew member be humiliated. In the bars and markets of Jericho, people talked. Some called Daniel foolish. Others called him brave. But everyone agreed he was different. On the 5th day of repairs, Daniel was checking the work on the plasma coolant system when he noticed someone watching him. She stood near the entrance to the repair bay, a young Avrian woman with blue and white plumage. Her feathers marked her as low caste in Avrian society, the kind of person who was supposed to serve, never lead. She held a data pad and kept glancing at a posting board where ship crews advertised for workers. Her shoulders were slumped in a way that Daniel recognized. It was the posture of someone who had been rejected too many times. "Can I help you?" Daniel asked. She jumped slightly, startled. "I'm sorry. I did not mean to stare. I heard about what you did. In the Karath expanse." She hesitated. "They say you actually care about your crew." "Of course I do," Daniel said, confused why this would be surprising. "Why would I hire someone I did not care about?" She looked down at her data pad. "I am a certified engineer. Top of my class at the Avrian Technical Institute. Specializations in plasma systems and jump drive mechanics." She spoke quickly as if racing to get the words out before losing courage. "But no one will hire me. My plumage color marks me as low caste. Avrian captains will not have me because I am beneath them. Other species will not have me because they say Avrians are too fragile for ship work." Daniel wiped grease from his hands and looked at her properly. She was young, probably mid-20s in human years. Her eyes showed intelligence and desperation in equal measure. "Can you fix a plasma converter that has been held together with repair tape and hope for the last 6 months?" Daniel asked. She blinked in surprise. "Yes, easily. I would need to replace the primary coupling and recalibrate the flow regulators, but yes." "What is your name?" "Sophie," she said quietly. "I am Daniel, captain of the Wandering Star. That is Velcross, my cargo master." He gestured to where the dragon was supervising the hull repairs. "We need an engineer. The pay is fair, the work is steady, and I do not care what color your feathers are." "Interested?" Sophie stared at him as if he had spoken in a language she did not understand. "You would hire me? Just like that?" "Just like that," Daniel confirmed. "Unless you need time to think about it?" "No," Sophie said quickly. "No, I accept. Thank you. Thank you so much." She moved into the ship's small engineering quarters that same day. By evening, she had already identified 17 different problems with the ship's systems that the repair crews had missed. By the next morning, she had fixed 12 of them. She is very good, Velcross observed, watching Sophie work with focused intensity. She is, Daniel agreed. Makes me wonder how many talented people are wasted because of stupid prejudices. 3 days later they encountered Greg. The Wandering Star was being restocked with supplies when a Thurian male approached Daniel in the station market. Thurians were the same species as the merchants who had tormented Velcross months ago. Seeing one made Velcross instinctively tense. But this Thurian was different. He stood straighter, looked people in the eye, and spoke with quiet respect rather than aggressive dominance. "Captain Daniel?" the Thurian asked. "Yes. My name is Greg. I heard you might be hiring crew." He paused, seeming to gather courage. "I am a cargo specialist and navigator. 5 years of experience. But I must be honest with you. I have been blacklisted by my own people." "Why?" Daniel asked, though his tone suggested he was curious rather than judgmental. "I refuse to participate in their business practices," Greg said flatly. "Thurians build their trading empires on deception and exploitation. They cheat clients, sell faulty goods and laugh about it. When I refused to do the same, when I insisted on honest dealing, they declared me a traitor to our way of life. No Thurian will hire me. Most other species will not hire me because I am Thurian and they assume I will cheat them." He met Daniel's eyes directly. "I am not like the others of my kind. I know what that makes me in their eyes. But I would rather be honest and unemployed than wealthy and corrupt." Velcross stepped forward. "This one speaks differently than the Thurians I have met." "Because I choose to," Greg said, turning to address the dragon. "I saw what my people did to you. In the corridor months ago. I was there." He looked ashamed. "I said nothing. I did nothing. I have regretted it every day since. I do not expect your forgiveness. But I want you to know that not all Thurians are proud of what we have become." There was a long silence. Velcross studied Greg carefully, looking for signs of deception. But he saw only sincerity and old pain. "Can you plot efficient routes through difficult space?" Daniel asked. "Yes," Greg said. "I can find paths others miss." "Then you are hired. Welcome to the Wandering Star." Greg's eyes widened in shock. "Just like that? You do not want references? Background checks?" "You were honest about your situation," Daniel said. "That tells me what I need to know." That evening, the crew of the Wandering Star sat together for dinner for the first time. Daniel cooked something he called spaghetti, though Sophie insisted the noodles were too thick and Velcross accidentally ate his fork along with the pasta. Greg had never tasted human food before and spent 10 minutes trying to figure out how to wind the noodles around his eating utensils. "This is strange," Greg said, finally managing to get a mouthful. "But good." "Wait until you try his curry," Velcross said. "Your mouth will burn for an hour." "It was not that spicy," Daniel protested. "You are human," Velcross replied. "Your species eats things that would kill most others and calls it seasoning." Sophie laughed, a light musical sound. It was the first time she had laughed in months. The others turned to look at her and she blushed under her feathers. "I am sorry. It is just nice to sit with people who treat each other kindly." "We are not people," Greg said quietly. "We are rejects. Outcasts. The unwanted." "No," Daniel said firmly. "We are crew. We are family. And family takes care of each other." Over the following weeks, the pattern of their life together took shape. Sophie worked miracles in the engine room, keeping systems running that should have failed years ago. Greg plotted routes that saved them time and fuel, finding paths through space that avoided both pirates and prejudiced authorities. Velcross managed cargo with careful precision and provided the muscle when heavy lifting was needed. And Daniel held them together, making decisions, finding work, and treating everyone with the same steady respect. Word continued to spread. The Wandering Star, that small battered freighter with the misfit crew. Some clients sought them out specifically because they needed people who would not judge unusual cargoes or ask inconvenient questions. Others avoided them entirely, unwilling to work with outcasts. But they survived. More than survived. They thrived. One evening, 6 weeks after Sophie and Greg had joined, the crew gathered for dinner as had become their custom. Daniel had attempted something called tacos, which involved folding food inside flat bread and somehow eating it without everything falling out. It was messy and chaotic and everyone loved it. "I have a question," Sophie said, carefully constructing her taco. "Why do you do this, Daniel? Hire people that everyone else rejects." Daniel thought about it while he added hot sauce to his food. "I guess I see what others do not. Being different is not the same as being less. You were rejected because of your feather color, which has nothing to do with your skills. Greg was rejected for being honest, which should be praised, not punished. Velcross was rejected for choosing peace over violence, which takes more courage than fighting ever could. He looked around the table at his crew. Everyone deserves a chance to be valued for who they are, not what society says they should be. That is a very human way of thinking, Velcross observed. Maybe, Daniel said. But it is also just common sense. Greg set down his taco looking serious. In Thurian culture we are taught that weakness must be exploited. That showing kindness is the same as showing vulnerability. And look where that got you, Sophie said gently. Cast out for refusing to be cruel. Exactly, Greg said. I was raised to believe one way but my heart told me it was wrong. It cost me everything I had built. My business, my status, my connections. He paused. But sitting here with all of you I realized something. I did not lose everything. I lost the wrong things. And I found the right ones. Velcross raised his drink. To finding the right things. To family, Sophie added. To new beginnings, Daniel said. To belonging, Greg finished. They drank together, for beings from 4 different worlds, rejected by their own people but accepted completely by each other. Outside the galley window, stars drifted past in the endless black. Inside, in the warm light and shared laughter, the crew of the Wandering Star proved something important. That worth was not determined by species or status or cultural rules. It was determined by how you treated others and who you chose to be. And by that measure, this family of misfits was worth more than all the empires in the galaxy. The message arrived on a cold morning while the Wandering Star was docked at Commerce Station Theta for routine resupply. Daniel was reviewing cargo manifests when the official transmission came through on the priority channel. Captain Daniel of the vessel Wandering Star. The voice was formal and cold. You are hereby notified that a representative of the Draconic Imperium has arrived at this station with legal business concerning your crew member designated Velcross, marked Exile. Your presence is required in Docking Bay 7 immediately. Daniel's stomach dropped. He found Velcross in the cargo bay, organizing supply crates with Sophie and Greg. Velcross, Daniel said quietly. We have a problem. They gathered in the ship's common room. The message played again on the view screen. Velcross's face went pale under his scales. The Imperium has sent an enforcer, Velcross said, his voice hollow. They do this sometimes when exiles become too visible, too comfortable. They want to remind us that we are nothing. That we will always be nothing. What does the enforcer do? Sophie asked nervously. He will issue a formal challenge. Ritual combat. I must either fight him and almost certainly die, or refuse and be executed for cowardice. Velcross looked at his crewmates, these people who had become his family. But there is a third option in the old law. If I refuse to fight, the enforcer may choose to destroy everything I value as punishment for my continued existence. The ship, Greg said, understanding. Us. Yes, Velcross said heavily. I am sorry. I have brought this on you. I should leave now, face him alone and perhaps. No, Daniel said firmly. We face this together. Let me see the exact wording of this challenge law. For the next hour, Daniel studied every file Velcross had on Draconic legal codes. The others watched him work, his eyes scanning line after line of ancient text. Finally, he sat back with a strange expression on his face. There is something here, Daniel said slowly. A provision. It says challenges can be answered by the challenged party or by a designated clan representative. I have no clan, Velcross said bitterly. That is what exile means. But you have a crew, Daniel said. And according to galactic employment law, a ship's crew constitutes a legal family unit for purposes of inheritance, medical decisions and representative actions. He looked up. This crew is your clan now. And as captain, I am the clan leader. Velcross stared at him in horror as understanding dawned. No. Daniel, no. You cannot fight a Draconic enforcer. They are trained from hatching in combat. Kethrel will be twice your size, armed with claws and fire. You will die. Maybe, Daniel said calmly. But the law allows it. And I am not letting you face this alone. This is insane, Sophie said, her feathers ruffling with agitation. There has to be another way. There is not, Greg said quietly. He had been reading the same legal text. Draconic law is absolute in these matters. Either Velcross fights or a representative fights or they all die. Those are the only options. Daniel stood. Then I will fight. Let's go meet this enforcer. They walked together to Docking Bay 7. A crowd had already gathered. News of a draconic challenge spread fast, and people came from all over the station to watch. Most looked excited. Challenges were rare entertainment. The enforcer stood in the center of the bay. Kethral was massive even for a dragon. His scales were polished black, unmarked by exile. Fire flickered at the edges of his jaw. He wore ceremonial armor that marked him as a high-ranking warrior of the Imperium. Beside him stood a draconic magistrate who would oversee the challenge and ensure proper protocol was followed. Velcross marked exile, the magistrate announced in a voice that carried across the bay. You stand accused of bringing shame to the Draconic Imperium by your continued visibility and comfort. Enforcer Kethral has issued formal challenge. How do you answer? Velcross stepped forward, but Daniel placed a hand on his arm and moved ahead of him. I answer, Daniel said clearly. I am Captain Daniel, clan leader of the Wandering Star crew. Under Provision 7 of the Ancient Challenge Codes, I claim the right to stand as representative for Velcross, who is a member of my clan. The crowd murmured in surprise. Kethral's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed. A human? Kethral's voice was deep and filled with contempt. You would have a human fight in your place, exile? Have you no shame at all? He fights for me because he chooses to, Velcross said, his voice stronger now. Because that is what family does. The magistrate consulted his data pad, checking the legal codes. Finally he nodded. The provision is valid. The challenge may be answered by a clan representative. Captain Daniel, do you understand that this is combat to submission or death? That Enforcer Kethral will not hold back his strength. I understand, Daniel said. This is foolish, Kethral said, but there was something in his voice that might have been respect. You will die quickly, human. I will make it as painless as I can out of respect for your courage, misguided though it is. Thanks, Daniel said dryly. When do we start? 1 hour, the magistrate announced. To allow the human to prepare. The crew returned to the ship. Sophie was crying quietly. Greg paced back and forth, his mind clearly racing through scenarios. Velcross sat in silence, looking broken. There must be something, Sophie said desperately. Some weapon, some advantage. No weapons beyond what the human can carry, Greg said, having memorized the rules. And nothing that would kill. This is supposed to be honorable combat. Daniel gathered a few items. A stun baton. A reinforced net used for securing cargo. Flash grenades. A small smoke disperser. Nothing that would seriously hurt a dragon but tools that might give him a chance. Daniel, Velcross said quietly. You do not have to do this. Yes, I do, Daniel said, checking the charge on his baton. You are my friend. My family. I am not watching you die when I can do something about it. You will die instead. Maybe, Daniel acknowledged. But at least I will die trying. The hour passed too quickly. They returned to the docking bay where a formal arena had been set up. Safety barriers protected the watching crowd. The magistrate stood at one end, ready to oversee the combat. Daniel entered the arena. He looked small compared to Kethral, fragile and human. But he stood straight, his jaw set with determination. Begin, the magistrate announced. Kethral moved first, faster than something his size should be able to move. Daniel dove aside, rolling and coming up with his stun baton active. He struck at Kethral's leg, but the dragon's scales absorbed most of the shock. Kethral's tail whipped around, catching Daniel in the ribs and sending him flying. Daniel crashed into the arena wall, gasping for breath. He forced himself back to his feet. The fight continued. Daniel used every advantage he had. He threw flash grenades that blinded Kethral temporarily. He used smoke to obscure his movements. He targeted joints and soft spots with his baton. He threw the net, tangling Kethral's legs and buying himself precious seconds. But Kethral was a trained warrior. He adapted quickly. And he was so much stronger. Fire washed across the arena floor. Daniel barely rolled clear, his jacket smoking. Kethral's claws raked his shoulder, tearing through clothing and skin. Daniel cried out but kept moving, kept fighting. Minutes felt like hours. Daniel's face was bloody. His ribs were probably cracked. He was limping badly. But he refused to stay down. Every time Kethral knocked him down, Daniel stood back up. The crowd had gone silent. They had expected quick entertainment. Instead, they were watching something else. They were watching a human refuse to quit despite impossible odds. Finally, Kethral caught Daniel properly. His massive claw closed around the human's torso, lifting him off the ground. Daniel gasped in pain, unable to breathe in the crushing grip. You have fought well, human, Kethral said, and his voice held genuine admiration. Better than any I have faced. But this ends now. Submit and I will make your death quick. Stop. Velcross's voice rang out across the arena. He stepped over the barrier, entering the combat zone. The magistrate started to object, but Velcross ignored him. Kethrel, look at him, Velcross said, pointing to Daniel struggling in the enforcer's grip. Look at what he risks. He gains nothing from this. No honor in your eyes, no glory, no reward. He does this purely because he believes I am worth protecting. Velcross's voice grew stronger, addressing not just Kethrel but the entire watching crowd. You call me coward because I refuse to kill in a duel. But tell me, what courage does it take to kill? Any fool can destroy. Any weakling can choose violence when challenged. He gestured to Daniel. But this human, barely a fraction of your size, Kethrel, stood against you knowing he would likely die. Not for glory. Not for honor as you define it. But for love. For friendship. For the belief that protecting those you care about is worth any price. He turned back to Kethrel directly. Our Imperium is built on strength and combat. We pride ourselves on our power. But what has it brought us? Fear, yes. Respect born of terror. But not love. Not loyalty. Not the kind of devotion that makes a human stand against a dragon to protect his friend. Velcross's voice rang with passion. We are not strong, Kethrel. We are brittle. We break others before they can break us, and we call it strength. But true strength is what I see in this human. True courage is choosing compassion when violence is easier. True honor is treating others with dignity even when society says they are worthless. The arena was absolutely silent. Every eye was fixed on Velcross, including Kethrel's. Look at him, Velcross said again, his voice soft now. Broken, bleeding, but still trying to protect me. That is what we have lost. That is what our Imperium can never teach. And that is why, despite my mark of shame, I am richer than any dragon in the Imperium. Because I have this. I have family who would die for me. Kethrel stared at Velcross for a long moment. Then he looked down at Daniel, still struggling weakly in his grip. The human's eyes were defiant even now, refusing to show fear. Slowly, Kethrel set Daniel down on the arena floor. Daniel collapsed immediately, too injured to stand but still breathing. Kethrel turned to the magistrate. I forfeit this challenge. The crowd erupted in shocked voices. Dragons never forfeited. It was unthinkable. What did you say? The magistrate asked, clearly stunned. I said I forfeit, Kethrel repeated, louder this time. He looked at Velcross. Perhaps the exile is wiser than the warrior. Perhaps we have forgotten what honor truly means. He walked to where Daniel lay and offered his claw to help the human up. Daniel, surprised, took it. Kethrel pulled him gently to his feet. You have my respect, Captain Daniel, Kethrel said formally. And you, Velcross. Perhaps your exile was not a punishment. Perhaps it was an escape from a system that has lost its way. The magistrate, flustered and uncertain, officially declared the challenge ended. The crowd slowly dispersed, talking excitedly about what they had witnessed. Sophie and Greg rushed to Daniel, supporting him as Velcross approached. You risked everything, Velcross said, his voice thick with emotion. Your life. For me. Daniel managed a painful smile through his swollen face. You are my friend, Velcross. You are my family. That is what family does. Velcross felt warmth spread through his chest, chasing away the last shadows of shame he had carried since his exile. He was marked, yes. Cast out by his people, yes. But he had found something more valuable than any Imperium could offer. He had found a place where he belonged. Daniel spent 4 weeks in medical recovery. The damage from Kethrel's claws had been severe. 3 broken ribs, a fractured collarbone, deep lacerations across his shoulder and back, and internal bruising that made every breath painful. The station doctor said he was lucky to be alive. Velcross barely left his side. The dragon sat in the medical bay for hours each day, keeping vigil while Daniel healed. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence. But Velcross was always there. You should be running the ship, Daniel said one afternoon, his voice still weak. Not sitting here watching me sleep. Sophie and Greg have the ship well in hand, Velcross replied. And I am exactly where I need to be. On the 3rd week, while Daniel was finally able to sit up without assistance, they received an unexpected visitor. A delegation from the Frontier Worlds Coalition arrived at the station, requesting a meeting with Captain Daniel. They came to the medical bay since Daniel could not yet leave. There were 3 of them, a human woman named Administrator Chin, an elderly Setian male called Counselor Vex, and a young Miran female who introduced herself as Representative Kara. Captain Daniel, Administrator Chin began, taking a seat beside his medical bed. We have been watching your operations for some time now. The way you run your crew. The jobs you take. The principles you uphold. Watching us? Daniel asked cautiously. The Frontier Worlds Coalition represents 47 planetary systems on the edge of civilized space, Counselor Vex explained in his slow, thoughtful manner. We face unique challenges. Our territories are diverse, filled with species who often distrust one another due to old prejudices and cultural conflicts. Trade is difficult. Cooperation is difficult. Progress is difficult. Representative Kara leaned forward. Then we saw what happened in the arena. A human fighting for a dragon. An exile and outcast forming a family. Different species working together not despite their differences but because they valued each other. It gave us an idea. Administrator Chin pulled out a data pad. We want to hire you, Captain Daniel. Not just for cargo runs. We want you to establish a new shipping network through frontier space. But more than that, we want you to expand your crew model. Hire more ships. Hire more outcasts. Build a fleet that proves cooperation works better than prejudice. Daniel stared at them, trying to process what they were suggesting. You want me to run a shipping fleet? We want you to run a movement, Counselor Vex corrected gently. The frontier worlds struggle because species refuse to work together. You have proven it is possible. We need you to prove it on a larger scale. The pay would be substantial, Administrator Chin added. Enough to repair your ship properly, upgrade your systems, and purchase or lease additional vessels. We would provide legal support, docking priority at all coalition stations, and protection from groups who might object to your hiring practices. Daniel looked at Velcross, who had been listening silently. What do you think? I think, Velcross said slowly, that you have a chance to help people the way you helped me. Many people. That seems worth doing. Daniel turned back to the delegation. I accept. But I have conditions. I choose my own crew members. I decide who gets hired based on character and ability, not species or status. No one tells me I have to reject someone because of prejudice. Agreed, Administrator Chin said immediately. And fair pay for everyone. Equal treatment. No discrimination. That is exactly what we want, Representative Kara said, smiling. They worked out the details over the next week. By the time Daniel was released from medical care, the contracts were signed. The Wandering Star would become the flagship of a new venture called the Wayward Fleet. Daniel would have authority to hire additional ships and crews, with coalition backing. The news spread quickly through the station. Within days, applications began arriving. Not from prestigious captains or wealthy merchants, but from the forgotten and rejected. Pilots who had been blacklisted for refusing corrupt orders. Engineers from species considered too weak for ship work. Navigators who had been cast out for questioning their culture's traditions. Daniel, with help from Velcross, Sophie, and Greg, reviewed every application personally. They looked for honesty, for skills, for people who had been rejected because they refused to compromise their principles. 3 months later, the Wayward Fleet prepared for its first major convoy run. 5 ships in total, each one old and patched but space-worthy. Each one crewed by outcasts who had found a new home. The evening before launch, Daniel called a gathering. All 5 crews assembled in the main hall of Station Theta. There were nearly 40 beings in total, representing 15 different species. They filled the hall with different colors, different shapes, different voices. But they shared one thing. They had all been rejected by their own people and accepted by Daniel. Tomorrow we launch, Daniel said, standing before them. His injuries had healed, though he still moved carefully. Tomorrow we begin proving something important. That worth is not determined by where you come from or what society labels you. That cooperation works better than competition. That treating people with dignity is not just morally right, it is practically effective. He paused, looking across the diverse crowd. Some of you are here because you refuse to be cruel. Some because you were born the wrong color or caste. Some because you chose peace over violence or honesty over profit. Your own cultures rejected you for these things. But I say those are exactly the qualities we need. The crowd was silent, listening intently. We will face challenges, Daniel continued. Some stations will refuse us. Some clients will reject us. Some groups will actively work against us because they hate what we represent. But we will succeed anyway, because we have something they lack. We have each other. Velcross stepped forward to stand beside Daniel. When I was starving in a corridor, marked and mocked, Daniel sat beside me and shared his bread. That simple act changed everything. It showed me that I still mattered. That I was still worthy of dignity. Now we have a chance to do the same for others. Sophie raised her voice from the crowd. To show them they matter. To give them dignity. Greg added. The hall erupted in voices, each crew member adding their own affirmation. When the noise finally settled, Daniel smiled. Before we go to our ships, I want to do something. A tradition that Velcross and I started and that has become important to our crew. He pulled out a large loaf of bread, fresh from the station bakery. It was bigger than the bread he had shared months ago in that dark corridor, but the principle was the same. Daniel broke the bread into pieces. He gave one to Velcross, who passed it to Sophie, who passed it to Greg. The bread made its way through the entire gathering. When everyone had a piece, Daniel raised his. This bread represents what we are building, he said. No one here earned it through strength or status. It is given freely because we are family. Because we believe everyone deserves to eat. Everyone deserves dignity. Everyone deserves a chance. To family, Velcross said, raising his piece. To dignity, Sophie added. To new beginnings, Greg continued. To hope, said a voice from the crowd. To belonging, said another. They ate together, 40 outcasts sharing bread in a station hall. Outside, 5 ships waited to carry them into the stars. Inside, a new kind of family was being born. Later that night, back on the Wandering Star, the original crew gathered one last time in their small galley. Tomorrow they would be the flagship of a fleet. Tonight they were still just 4 friends. Are you ready for this? Sophie asked Daniel. Leading an entire fleet is different from captaining one ship. Probably not, Daniel admitted. But we will figure it out together. We could have walked away, Greg said thoughtfully. The coalition offered positions teaching at academies, consulting roles, comfortable lives. But we all chose to stay here. Because this is home, Velcross said simply. This crew. The ship. This is where we belong. Daniel looked around the table at his family. A dragon marked with shame who had found honor. An engineer rejected for her feathers who had found respect. A merchant who chose honesty over profit and found purpose. And himself, a human who had simply tried to do what seemed right. You know, Daniel said quietly, when I sat down beside Velcross that first day, I did not think about changing the galaxy. I just saw someone who was hungry and I had food to share. It seemed simple. It was simple, Velcross replied. That is what makes it profound. The greatest truths are always simple. Treat others with dignity. Share what you have. Stand up for what is right. Anyone can do these things. They just have to choose to. And now 40 people have made that choice, Sophie said. Because you showed them it was possible. No, Daniel corrected gently. We showed them together. This was never just me. This was all of us proving that outcasts can build something better than the societies that rejected them. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, new struggles. But tonight they were just family sharing space and trust and hope. I have been thinking, Velcross said eventually, about what Kethral said in the arena. That perhaps my exile was not punishment but escape. I think he was right. The Imperium could never give me what I have here. They could never give me you. He looked at each of them in turn. I was offered a teaching position. Young dragons want to learn my philosophy. It is a chance for influence, for vindication, for everything I thought I wanted. But you turned it down, Greg said, understanding. I did. Because philosophy without practice is empty. And the practice I need is here with you. Living these principles every day. Showing that they work not through words but through action. Daniel smiled and raised his glass of water. To action then. To proving every day that compassion is stronger than cruelty. That cooperation beats competition. That sharing bread with a stranger can change the galaxy. They all raised their glasses. To the wayward fleet, Sophie said. To family, Greg added. To humanity's greatest strength, Velcross finished. The simple choice to care. They drank together as stars wheeled past the galley window. Tomorrow they would lead a fleet into the frontier, carrying hope to the forgotten and rejected. Tonight they simply sat together, for beings from 4 worlds who had found something precious in the vastness of space. They had found home. And it had all started with bread shared in a dark corridor. With one human who saw worth where others saw worthlessness. With the simple radical act of treating someone with dignity when the galaxy said they deserved none. The Wandering Star would fly again tomorrow. But tonight, in this small galley filled with warmth and friendship, the real journey was already complete. They had already arrived at the destination that mattered most. They had found each other. And that was enough.